Good luck.
Thanks. I feel like you're judging me. Okay. Thanks for coming to me and thanks for listening to me. When I was a kid, about 4 or 5 years old, I lived in Pennsylvania and I went to a school called Johnstown Christian Academy. And on 9/11 in 2001, the whole school went crazy and the parents were coming to pull out their kids and stuff, which was sort of happened nationwide. And when the 2 planes hit the Twin Towers and 1 plane hit the Pentagon, there was also another plane headed for the they think it was headed for the White House. And it crash landed in a field in Pennsylvania. So that freaks my mom. So she comes and pulls me out of school, and little 4-year-old me has no clue what's going on. I'm still like wild, crazy, hyper me. But my brother and sister were kind of quiet, and it was really weird. So anyways, I was talking to my mom about 4 years later about it, and she told me that Pennsylvania plane crash had happened 10 miles from my school. So any little change in steering, considering how fast the plane was going, could have turned it onto my school. So it was kind of like a horrifying moment of, oh my gosh, I could be dead right now. And I was sort of ignorant to that fact that this plane crashed 10 miles from my school. And a common phrase in our culture is that ignorance is bliss. And I think that this is one of the most false statements that anybody could ever say. And I think that this statement, in fact, is ignorant itself. Today I'm going to be talking about a subject that we as Americans can be somewhat ignorant to, suicide. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States and second for 15 to 24-year-olds. Now, how many of you knew that suicide was that prevalent in our culture? But I don't think this gives credit to how epidemic it is. There are 41,000 suicides a year that contribute to that being the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. But there are 250,000 people classified as suicide survivors every year. So when you see the 10th leading cause in the United States, all they're saying is that there's 41,000 successful. But they're not taking into account the 250,000 people that could have died that were thankfully unsuccessful in their attempt. So suicide is real in our society, and suicide is prevalent. And this is what I want to talk about. I have 3 things that I want to talk about in relation to this. The first is the untreated epidemic of suicide. The second is what can we do to prevent suicide. And the third seems kind of like a stupid question, but I'll talk about it. Why should we prevent suicide? So first, the untreated epidemic of suicide. Over the past 15 years, the number of suicides per year has increased every single year consistently. And yet, we as a society continue not to talk about it, and I wonder why. Because I think one of the main reasons that suicide is such a prevalent idea is that we don't talk about it at all. We don't talk about depression. We don't talk about suicide. How many times at home or school have you heard about suicide? I'm sure it's been a few because it happens, but I bet when you talked about it, that somebody gave depression or something a shameful connotation and tried to change the subject super quick because they felt uncomfortable. So why does no one talk about this? And why does nobody talk about being depressed or having suicidal thoughts? And I think it's because they give these things a shameful connotation. If you talk about being depressed, you are seen as someone that needs help, like you have a mental condition. I remember, never mind, wrong one. So why do I think people should talk about this? There have been multiple studies done that show that people treated for depression are almost always successfully treated. A study of children treated showed that around 85% of children treated are treated successfully if they are treated for depression. So I think if suicide and depression were talked about and not talked about like a weird thing, which they shouldn't be, a quarter of Americans are depressed or struggle with depression at one point in their life, then maybe people would go get help. So what can we do as everyday citizens to prevent suicide? The first thing I think we have to do, and I've already talked about, is remove this connotation on depression. We can't hinder people's lives because we don't understand what's going on in their head. And the second, I think there's also a negative connotation on going and getting help through therapy. I think we need to take this away too. I remember about a year ago, I had to go and get therapy for some personal issues, and And I was ashamed of it. I wouldn't tell my friends when I was leaving school early to go to it. While I was leaving school, I'd make up something random. And when I told them, they were supportive, but people are sort of negative about therapy until they know somebody that's doing it. And I remember how scared I was that people were going to find out and think, oh, it's this weird kid that has some mental condition. Like, when I don't, I'm a perfectly normal person. But it was a humbling experience, I guess you could say. So, why do we need to prevent suicide, or attempt to, at least, in our society? I think the obvious reason is we need to save people's lives. Yes, that is 100% true. About a year and a half ago, my father struggled with depression for about 6 months. And he was very ashamed of it. He wouldn't tell his closest friends. He had an accountability group that he had been meeting with for 5 years. And he didn't tell them until a month before he committed suicide himself. I don't think, from where I stood, from where I saw him, I was with him every day, I don't think he thought about suicide at the time. I think he was just depressed, and one day life got too much. But one of the other problems with the whole situation was 20 years before he committed suicide, his father had committed suicide. And nobody in his family went to therapy. They avoided it because they wanted to uphold this image of a perfect family, and a perfect family didn't need to get help. They were able to sustain themselves. And so, because of this connotation, this negative connotation that we talked about, they wouldn't go and get help. So my father struggled with depression for 6 months, and there's a lot more to it, but one day he committed suicide. And society lost a very valuable member that day. He was my biggest cheerleader. I remember one day we sat and watched 8 hours of high school soccer game film, going through to try and make a recruitment video for me for college. And he was a wonderful doctor, a family man, but the life got the best of him, and he quit. So the obvious reason I've already stated is that we want to save people's lives, yes. But the second reason I think that we should attempt to prevent suicide in our culture is because of what happens after the suicide. I've already talked about this once in class. My family went through that huge 6-month saga with life insurance, and it was a huge load on my mom, and we lost millions of dollars, and that was horrible. And I can talk about that, as I did earlier, for a whole 10 or 15 minute speech. But there's a lot more that happened after that. My mom lost her husband, and she lost her best friend, and she has to find her way through retirement and the finishing of raising her kids alone, which is overwhelming at times. I lost my father. I remember sitting in school one day about 2 weeks after this line for school that I could get started. About 2 weeks after it happened, and I sort of had, I guess the guys don't understand this, I had a question that you cannot ask your mom because it's weird, and you can't ask your siblings because they're like the same age as you. So it's like the only person you can ask is your dad. And I still have never gotten an answer to this question, but I remember sitting in the line crying because I had no clue what to do and who to ask. So I lost my father, and I had to go to therapy and I had super high anxiety levels for about 8 to 10 months. And I was scared of knives. I was scared of pools. I wouldn't swim. I wouldn't look at pools. If I saw a pool, I would pretty much run away. My brother, that's a whole nother story. He tried to be the tough guy, and he sort of went to where he lived after it all happened, after the funeral and stuff. And 6 months later, he sort of mentally collapsed. He did mentally collapse, and he is now on a ranch, a long-term facility, getting treated for anxiety and depression because of my father's suicide. Finally, my sister recently got married and didn't get her dad to walk her down the aisle. So the aftereffects of suicide, I could keep going, but I'm not going to. They're numerous and many, and those people's lives that are surrounding the person that suicided are thrown into a tornado of life choices and decisions that they should never have to make. So in conclusion, people always have people that love them, yes, 100%. If any of you are struggling today with depression or suicidal thoughts, remember that people love you. And also, there's nothing wrong with going and getting help, because we as humans were not designed to live life on our own at all. God did not create us that way. He created us together for a reason. So there's nothing wrong with going to seek counseling. And remember that suicide is a permanent solution to an impermanent problem. I started my speech talking about how ignorance is bliss, and I talked about how this wasn't true. And I want to close with another quote that I think sums up us not wanting to sort of accept that suicide is real in our society. So it says, "The short-term pain of accepting the truth is much better than the long-term pain of believing in a lie."